Imagine a smiling clown at a children's party. Red nose, painted grin, balloons floating in the air. Parents laughing, kids clapping. Everyone sees a harmless man in a costume. But behind the grease paint and laughter hides one of America's darkest monsters. A man who would go on to kill at least 33 young men and boys, and bury many of them beneath his own home. This is John Wayne Gacy was born on March 17, 1942, in Chicago, Illinois. His childhood was far from normal and far from happy. His father, John Stanley Gacy, was an alcoholic and an abusive man. He often lashed out at his wife and children, especially young John. No matter how hard Gacy tried to please his father by doing chores, working hard, or even standing up straight, he was always met with insults and sometimes physical abuse. His father often called him weak or compared him unfavorably to his sisters. This early rejection planted the first seeds of anger and confusion inside Gacy's mind. He wanted his father's approval more than anything, but he never got it. Instead, he grew up with shame, low self-esteem, and a desperate hunger for validation. At school, things weren't much better. Gacy wasn't a popular kid. He suffered from health problems, including a heart condition, which kept him from sports. He often fainted unexpectedly and couldn't participate in physical activities. Other kids teased him, calling him soft or strange. Once again, Gacy was on the outside looking in, never fully accepted, never fully respected. But there was another side to Gacy. He had a charm, a friendliness that he learned to use as a survival tool. While he struggled with his father at home and bullies at school, he began to realize something. If he smiled, joked, and worked to make others happy, they tended to like him. He became a people pleaser, the kind of person who would volunteer, help, or act cheerful even when he was boiling with anger inside. This duality, this split between the smiling exterior and the troubled interior would define his entire life. By his teenage years, Gacy was already experimenting with manipulation. He could charm adults, make friends with authority figures, and talk his way out of trouble. He worked odd jobs and even became involved in politics at a young age. Volunteering for the Democratic Party, he liked being seen, recognized, and appreciated things he never got at home. But underneath all of this, there were early warning signs. Gacy struggled with his sexuality, something that weighed heavily on him during the 1950s and 60s, when homosexuality was considered shameful by most of society. He felt conflicted, even disgusted with himself at times. These hidden desires mixed with his resentment toward his father and his obsession with control, slowly shaping the person he would become. When Gacy left home, he tried to escape his father's shadow. He moved out, worked different jobs, and tried to start a new life. For a while, it looked like he was turning things around. He got married, had children, and even opened a successful business. To the outside world, John Wayne Gacy was a model citizen, hardworking, friendly, a family man. But beneath the mask of normalcy, darker urges were growing stronger. On the surface, John Wayne Gacy was living the American dream. He married his first wife, Marlon Myers, and they had 2 children together. Gacy worked in management positions and was known in his community as a man who loved to volunteer. He was active in politics, social clubs, and neighborhood events. People liked him. But behind closed doors, a different story unfolded. Gacy's marriage began to crumble, not only because of his constant infidelity, but also because of his secret life. He spent time at gay bars, had affairs with men, and grew increasingly reckless. His wife eventually discovered his hidden lifestyle, and their marriage ended. After the divorce, Gacy's darker side became harder to control. He still kept up the image of a community man, someone who was always smiling, always willing to help, always the life of the party. But he also started engaging in criminal behavior. In the late 1960s, he was convicted of sexually assaulting a teenage boy in Iowa. He was sentenced to prison, but served only 18 months of a 10-year sentence before being released. And here is where society failed. Gacy should have been monitored, kept under watch. But instead, he slipped through the cracks. He returned to Illinois, moved into a quiet suburban neighborhood in Norwood Park, and began building his second life. It was here, in this seemingly ordinary home, that John Wayne Gacy would begin his reign of terror. December 1978. Chicago was gripped by winter's chill when a 15-year-old boy named Robert Piest vanished. Robert was last seen leaving his shift at a local pharmacy. He had told a co-worker that he was going to talk to a contractor about a potential job, someone who promised him good pay. That man was John Wayne Gacy. When Robert didn't come home that night, his family panicked. He wasn't the type to run away. He was a good student, close to his parents, with plans for the future. Something was wrong. They quickly discovered that the last person to see Robert alive was indeed Gacy when officers questioned him. Gacy brushed them off. He claimed he knew nothing, that the boy had never come to his house. His confident, charming demeanor almost convinced them, Detectives began to dig deeper. They looked into Gacy's past and what they found raised alarm bells. A prior conviction for sexual assault of a teenage boy in Iowa, allegations of misconduct, complaints that had been dismissed. Suddenly, Gacy didn't look like a harmless contractor anymore. He looked dangerous. The police obtained a search warrant for Gacy's house. On the surface, it looked ordinary, a suburban home decorated for the holidays. But as investigators moved through the rooms, they noticed something unsettling. A strange odor lingered in the air, an earthy, foul smell. Gacy blamed it on poor drainage, repeating the excuse he had used so many times before. At first, the search turned up nothing definitive. But investigators found items that didn't belong to Gacy: a high school ring, driver's licenses, clothing. Things connected to young men who had gone missing. The net was tightening. Detectives put Gacy under surveillance. They followed him everywhere. And as the pressure mounted, Gacy began to unravel. He drank heavily, drove erratically, and even confessed bits and pieces to friends. He knew the end was near. Finally, after days of surveillance, Gacy broke. He invited his lawyers to his home and confessed in chilling detail. He admitted to killing maybe 30 young men. He described how he buried many of them in his crawl space. He even laughed, bragging about how he had gotten away with it for so long. On December 21, 1978, police returned to his home with a second search warrant. This time, they went into the crawl space. What they found was beyond comprehension. Beneath the floorboards, in shallow graves, were the remains of Gacy's victims. One by one, bodies were unearthed. The air was heavy with decay. Detectives wore masks to block the stench, but nothing could block the horror. It wasn't just one body. Or two, or even 10. It was dozens. By the end, 29 bodies were discovered beneath his house and property. 4 more were recovered from rivers where Gacy had dumped them when he ran out of space. In total, 33 young men and boys. The news exploded across America. The idea that a respected community member, a businessman, and most chillingly a clown, could be responsible for such monstrous crimes shocked the nation. Neighbors who had once laughed at Gacy's jokes now recoiled in horror. Parents who had once trusted him with their children couldn't believe the truth. The image of the smiling clown was forever changed. Gacy was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder. His trial would become one of the most notorious in U.S. history, with every gruesome detail of his crimes laid bare. But before we get there, pause for a moment. Think about the sheer scale of his deception. For years, Gacy lived as both a friendly neighbor and a cold-blooded killer. While police searched for missing boys, their bodies lay just feet beneath the living room where Gacy entertained guests. While children laughed at Pogo the Clown, their entertainer was hiding a monstrous secret. The mask had finally slipped. The truth was out.